Morning. Okay, so this morning as the last lecture for this group, in the last lecture session that we've got in this fantastic place, we decided to treat you to something that we thought was kind of useful, namely a troubleshooting session, or crisis situations management. Crisis management in debates. What does that mean? Namely, answering the question of what to do when things go seriously wrong. How do you save your position? How do you save your behinds? And ultimately, how do you save the debate? However, the way that we're going to do it, since that is something that mostly depends on you, won't be to, give you downright some strategies and anticipate all these situations. We've got some scenarios here noted down. However, the first part of this lecture, this session, should be your questions and answers. So now try and think of all the possible things that could go wrong, that you have seen go wrong. Some debates which are basically broken debates and which put you into those awkward positions of to knife or to lose, or something like that. So try and think about that for a second, which is gone. And let's see what to do in those situations. So what is the first thing that comes to mind? Yes.
When you're second government, an opening government just completely dropped the ball. Basically, when they just didn't do a good framework, and pretty much it's a minefield to try to step over, try to not knife them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so do you mean when they don't define anything, or just define the motion too wild, or don't have a case?
Like, either one of those, don't have a case, didn't define anything correctly, didn't build a good framework, gave you no foundation to stand on.
Yeah. Okay, is there anyone, let's just start by answering that and then we can move on.
Well, I mean, on that example, we had a motion about drones, and banning the use of drones, and the opening government spoke about robots that clean your house. Started with that, so it got real, because we were in second government, so it's very, difficult that.
Yeah. Has anyone not been in that situation? When you're the closing team and the opening team pretty much ruins the debate in advance. Okay, so everyone's done that. What do you do in that case?
What I've learned is you just blame the opposition for everything. And that is, you're like, the opposition has grossly mischaracterized the case brought forward by the government. The government may talk a little about this, but also they were meaning this, and the opposition just totally ignored that, right? Like, you just blame the opposition for making the Gov case look bad, even though the Gov team was responsible.
Okay. What is the potential problem with that?
Could be not true.
Namely, the problem is that the adjudicator wasn't there for hearing. It's not like they just walked in.
Can you BS the judge?
Okay, what else? It is an interesting strategy. What else is there to be done? Okay, so many hands. Let's start from my left.
Yeah, it's usually very common to say, for example, perhaps the government made very interesting points, but now we are focusing the debate on some other topic that which we think is also important, and then we just go to someplace else. But not really saying that it's true.
Yeah. What's the problem with that?
It could be knifing.
It could be knifing. So how do you knife with style?
Or butter knife.
Butter knife. Thank you. That's the word.
What a good phrase to use to kind of get into the butter knife is to say, like, we're going to take it back to principles and our half of the debate, and then you kind of just discuss what should have been kind of behind the motion, and then imply vaguely that that's what was behind what opening government was saying, and then you can kind of use it to connect those principles to other arguments that you can make.
Yeah. Basically, whenever, just from an adjudicative's perspective, whenever you hear someone in the closing team stand up and say, and now we're going to take a step back, basically that is them renouncing whatever happened in the first part of the debate, but that is legitimate. Okay, any other common suggestions, ideas, or examples?
Just like use sneaky language. So you're not directly doing things, but it's clear that like you want a problems debate, or we think, I think what you can say is we think what opening gov was talking about was, like, well, we think the opening gov talked about this, we also think we can all talk about the real election. And so if you also think we can talk about use of drones in another scenario, like when you kill people.
Yeah, would you actually use, the phrase of, we are going to also talk about this other thing that the debate was about? Because that is something that comes back to the question of not just strategy, but also style. The difference between a knife, like a dagger, and a butter knife, very often comes down to just this matter of how smoothly you manage to present it. So as long as this clear separation from the opening table, however horrible they were, is clearly visible, where you are sort of giving a wink to the judge, they were idiots, but we are not. That is something that is clearly, perhaps not even by the adjudicator, but you probably will be called out on it by the opposing team, because that is what they're there to do, to point to the potential inconsistencies in the case. So one of the ways to approach it is, as Dylan said, go back to whatever principle you can tie it to, and then go from there. Got something to add?
I've got a big mouth, so if I need to say something, I will.
Okay, fantastic. I'm very grateful to Art for being here in this lecture to assist me, basically, because he's already done his fair share of lectures this week. Didn't have to, could have been sleeping, but he's here. Thank you. Okay. What about, so we had the case where the government basically doesn't do their job, and a case where they clearly squirrel. What about squirrels such as this one? Drones are actually robots that clean your house. I'm trying to imagine that debate.
Like one of the opposing arguments, like opposition went with it, and they were, like one of the main arguments were, I think it was them, because they said the main problem is that men have relationships and affairs with domestic workers, and therefore this kind of social dynamic is going to go away.
Okay, here's a question for everyone. As closing government in that debate, what do you do?
I think push the phrase that he's not trying to knife a dead person.
When they're already dead.
Okay.
I think they have laws against mutilating corpses.
For when you're shackled to it? They cut off the gun. It's like,
I think at that point you just need to divorce yourself from the drive to win and just have fun. Talk about unmanned underwater submersibles that like research in trenches in the ocean.
I mean,
I think that's the way to go.
I mean, y'all probably could speak more to it as judges, but I think the judges are probably desperately trying to, hoping that someone will turn this into a real debate, right?
That is a very good point. So it's not just about you who are in that debate and could probably have fun and have fun knifing dead, but also think about the poor people who are watching that and who have to watch that and listen to that for an hour. Okay, so what would you do? Or was that just a suggestion? I feel sorry for the judges.
I mean, I don't know. If I were a member of government, I'd probably say, like, we've had a really interesting discussion of a pretty myopic area of this resolution, but we'd like to take a step back and look at broader issues. Like, we believe that what the government has brought is interesting, but we'd like to go a little bit farther and talk about exactly the principle behind this and other examples that you may see.
Okay. Nick, you had something to add? Dylan's got something to say.
Yeah, I think the best way to go is just to be like, yeah, well, you know, they're talking about how, like, it's important to remove the human element in relationships between the man and his housemaid. And we think that removing the human element is a bad idea. As in drone strikes, for example, when we like use robots to like shoot bombs. We think that's bad. We're going to argue a lot about that.
This is lovely and very elegant and doesn't hurt. That's an example of a butter knife because you don't even feel it going in.
And if I can point out the way that you phrase that, one of the things that, as Julija and I were hearing about this, is one of the most critical things is how do you link? How do you link these things? And that was a really good way to link this.
Precisely. So not going back to the original principles that you had in mind while preparing the motion, but actually doing your best to try and find a link, extract some principles that may have, that may be linking the original ludicrous proposal and the actual debate, and pretend that that's what it's really, that's all it was about from the very first moment. And also, what you did is actually make it about the actual debate, but pretending that it's just an example. It's not the actual debate, it's just an example, and then take it from there. So that is really lovely. But let's go back to the question squirreling. Generally, when the opening prop squirrels, it doesn't happen very often anymore, but it still can happen. Sometimes it's just an unwitting squirrel. They don't know what the motion is about. They're too afraid to ask, or they think they know what it's about, and suddenly you have a debate that nobody in the room, except for them, expected. Let's look at it from the perspective of the opening opposition. So you're opening up. You've done your preparation. Your 15 minutes were productive. You've got your op case. You're expecting a reasonable line from the government, and then you realize that it's not what you expected. It's a total squirrel. What do you do?
I think the first thing you need to do is you kind of have to piggyback off what the opening government said. If you want to, I mean, because you have to kind of play. It's the opening op. I would think you have to play by their rules a little bit.
Luke disagrees.
Yeah, I think that if you are unhappy with some of the things that First Gov says and think it's not going to lead to a good debate, then you say, we disagree that the term drones is actually referring to, you know, things that clean my house for me. We think that really what this debate is supposed to be about is things falling from the sky trying to kill people at the push of a button, and then you take First Gov on their arguments, and you also argue in favor of what you're actually talking about.
Okay. Does anyone see a potential problem with that?
I mean, I don't know, like, one of the things that is really scary is also is that the government, that First Parliament is going to stand up and defend its definition of drones, so that the debate turns out into a definition debate, which is terrible.
Precisely. Whose fault is it then?
The government.
I mean, I think
there is nothing more boring than semantic debates. The debate about the debate and what the debate was supposed to be about. Now, while in that particular case, as the opposition, you are justified in wanting to debate the real debate and the real motion, you will probably manage to win the first table, because it's whatever you do, it can't be worse than what the opening government did, right? However, thinking strategically, it's not about being better than them, but rather about winning the debate. And if what you do is insist on the stuff that you are preparing because you're not willing to debate what they have set up. What will happen is that you will also contribute to creating a non-debate. So while justified, it may not always work. Namely, there are squirrels and there are squirrels. There are squirrels, squirrels by definition are very unfair. That's why we don't like them. It's not that we don't like them because they're not fun or because they're not debatable. It's rather that they are unfair, that the other teams have basically wasted 15 minutes of their lives preparing for something that never came to be. And it gives an unfair advantage to the squirreling team, to the opening government, because they're the only ones who know what the debate will be about. However, if the squirrel is still debatable, if despite not being a reasonable interpretation of the motion, it can still create a reasonable debate. So if there are clashes to be had, if there are principles to be opposed, then the general recommendation would be go with it. The judge will be able to recognize what happened. They won't be looking at that debate in a vacuum and just thinking, oh, you guys don't seem very prepared. Why isn't your op case stronger? They will realize what happened, and you will be rewarded for thinking on your feet and for doing the best that you can for the debate. So it is not something that you would be punished for if you fail to perform in an optimal manner. However, if in case of squirrels which stem from the government basically doing themselves a disservice because of not understanding what the motion is about and creating something that is not debatable to begin with, in that case, yes, absolutely explaining why it didn't make sense, not wasting too much time on opposing that, but still kind of showing in 2 sentences why the structure doesn't stand, and then proposing an alternative framework. However, when it comes to proposing alternative frameworks, it comes dangerously close to definitional challenge, and that is probably the worst thing that can happen in a debate, which is why we've just stopped mentioning that as an option to people who start doing BP now, because 10 and 15 years ago it was like one of those things that can happen in a debate. But when they do happen, when the opposition actually challenges the definition of the motion and pretends to be an alternative government and proposes again, it just leads to ruined debates. So it won't lead to a good debate. If there is anything that you can do to save the original debate, however bad it is, then that is something that you should do. Art and I actually had a pretty detailed discussion about that particular case, or rather that the virtue that lies in saving the debate and doing favors to the government when you are in the opposition and they are being dysfunctional. Namely, going back to the original example, if they fail to define pretty much anything, or if they completely don't make sense, there are 2 ways you can play it. One would be to attack the stuff that you have, the petty stuff, the mechanism, the whatever you can find that still makes sense. And what that will do is definitely make you do better than they do, so you can win the first half, but not win the debate. In order to win the debate, what a good opening opposition has to do for the bad opening government is basically do them a favor of completing their case for them, constructing their case for them, being gracious enough to sort of assume that what they really meant to say was, paraphrase in much better words what it is that they may have meant to say and what any real good government would have done in that case, and then attacking that. I think we had that in the second round where the debate about the right to secede was defined as the right to freedom of speech. So the opening opposition, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was someone from the room. Yeah, it was you guys. I think Luke then started with, let's assume that what this would eventually lead to would be. So therefore, spending the first part of your speech doing something for them, building this sandcastle for them just so you could pull it down. Because otherwise what you have is winning a bad debate instead of creating a good debate in order to be won. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And I want to kind of piggyback on something Julija just brought up. The big difference here is between the 3 and the potential of getting the 1 or the 2. All right, this is the major difference. And the more gracious you can be in helping your opponent out, the more you look like you are the top team. All of you are familiar with the word apologia. It doesn't hurt to start out if you're the op and say, you know, first of all, Mr. Speakers, especially in an ESL environment, we want to, you know, we apologize if we misunderstood, but this is what we think we understood the debate to be about. Okay, be willing to take throw the prop a bone, and be willing to take a little bit of the heat.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Am I making sense? Okay. Sometimes the metaphors that I use don't make sense in an ESL environment.
Sorry, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is also, it is something that is a matter of strategy as well as style, because the more multicultural, multinational and diverse an environment of competition is, the less tolerated any sort of passionate or even pronounced behavior will be. So something that will fly at home, you know, calling the opponents jerks for doing what they did, is something that probably won't be tolerated in an environment where the potential of someone taking it wrong and being really offended is. So in that case, as Art said, kind of, oh, you know, excuse our ignorance, but we thought this pardon me strategy works much better than just going, they have no idea what they were talking about. And then continuing again to beat a dead horse. Because once again, from the judge's perspective, the judge is not a complete idiot. Like, we like to pretend we are, so when it comes to analysis, please do treat us like we're idiots. That's perfectly fine. But when it comes to perceiving the dynamics of a debate, they can tell what happened, and you won't be rewarded for not being nice, but if they see you being nice and gracious in a situation which is anything but, that is something that will and can be awarded. So it can come down to a matter of a couple of speaker points more if you're just being generally nice and doing nice things for the debate. Okay, what about any other cases or situations, troubles that you've run into or think can happen in a debate to ruin it for you?
When, okay, so say after that happens, and basically the situation that happened in round 2, where we were first off, and then second go does a butter knife after we present our case, and then we're like, this isn't what we expected at all.
So what is the question really?
So how do you combat like a total shift in the debate that you had no way of knowing about from first off?
Can you explain the situation?
Okay, so first go, like, set up the debate as being about like the right to talk about secession, and that we should be able to talk about it, and that's a good thing. And then I was like, well, really, if you talk about it, it's going to lead to secession anyway, so we're just going to assume that occurs. And then second gov gets up and is like, here are the criteria for like when you should be able to secede. And basically kind of give a backhanded model without really doing it. And then we were like, how do we deal with these new criteria that were not a part of the debate before all the references were over?
Some good POIs. Be like, but still, what we said applies, and this is why.
Precisely. So POIs are a great weapon to use in any case. So if you're the closing team and there is some serious trouble going on in the first half, POIs are a great way to try and instill some sense or kind of hint at the wrong direction the debate is taking if you're a closing team, but also if things go out of hand in the second half, they're a great way to remind the rest of the debate of the original principles that you introduced, as well as remind the judges of the great input that you had and which may have been forgotten at that point. However, in this particular case as well, the thing is that it all comes down to your motion analysis in your 15 minutes. The way that I saw it in this debate is that what was brought in by the second government wasn't necessarily a completely new case out of nowhere, but something that should have been and should have appeared in the first half. And while preparing for the debate, while analyzing the motion and thinking about your strategy, that is something that you should kind of have in mind. Anticipate the opposing side's strategy and the lines of argumentation that they will take, so that if those lines appear at some later point in the debate, you have preemptively dealt with them, rather than just opposed the ones that appeared up until that moment, made your op case, but not anticipated the potentially really good arguments that could take you down later in the debate. So how do I put this and not use the phrase of preemptive rebuttal? Basically, preemptive rebuttal. So no, it is all about anticipation and kind of having the whole debate in mind already before stepping out to give the first speech. There were some comments, questions. Yeah, okay, Maya and then Dylan, Jake.
If I just have a question about the situation again, so we have first God and they kind of just do a bad job, and then you're off and you try to be really nice and rebuild their case, or just go with what they propose, given that it's debate and what is not the debate. And then you have the second half to go just do the proper debate, because second God will manage nicely, to go away from what was happening, and then they have the proper debate. Isn't there just a bias that, judges go, award the better places to second half anyways, because they're having the debate, and it's great that up to that, and they tried to have the debate, and the rules, and how do you judge a debate like this, where you have first off who's just talking about different stuff, in a great way, but the debate is really happening in the second half, and how do you deal with this as a judge?
So basically, if I understand it right, I'm going to interpret a little bit now. But basically, you're asking me for a nod that would confirm that this effort would be recognized. The answer is you analyze how heavily the second half relies on the first half. So the reason why second government would be awarded in that case wouldn't be because there was a real debate in the second half, but because they managed to pull something good out of a really bad situation. So the contribution that they made, and if the starting position was 0 and they brought it to 50, then it's a good thing. However, in the case of opposition, you also started from the same 0. So if the closing off has to rely and heavily relies on the framework that was provided by the opening opposition in that case, they wouldn't necessarily come above you, and so in the end you compare the lines of conflict and the dynamics between the different teams in the debate. But it absolutely is possible to win from opening up, even if opening prop killed the debate in advance. But it depends on what the other teams will do, because it's also not fair to punish them for having been born to better circumstance. You know, so in many of these cases, when it comes to trouble, the main concern no longer becomes how to win the debate, but rather how to save it. Because if you go with what was provided, you're going down with the debate. And if you manage to save something out of it, then you know you'll come in second instead of third. So it is about compromising, but let's just say the difference would be reflected in speaker points and would be reflected drastically, if that means something. Because the team that screws up would be punished not just by taking a fourth, but by having 10 plus speaker point difference. The right side or the left side of the room seems to be kind of quiet and falling asleep. Is there anything you would like to add, ask, comment on, or request?
Can I ask a question? Can I make a point and ask a question?
Please.
It seems to me that more and more, especially in the practice rounds, there's been this tendency to go to only one POI. And for that reason, I would really encourage you to know what you're going to say in your POI, especially when things have gone horribly wrong in the opening government, and be able to use that one POI you're likely to get to the maximum advantage. And so rather than picking on trivial things, pick on the big things. Major on the majors and forget about the minors, okay? Because you're probably only going to get that one POI. Julia, what do you think about if you're in a morally reprehensible position?
I think that was your favorite point, so you may want to elaborate on that. Let's see what.
So somehow or another, opening government manages to say something to the effect of, so in the last analysis, Mr. Speaker, we really do not have a problem with genocide, and we really do think that the only thing that was wrong with Adolf Hitler was he didn't go far enough. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What do? Has anybody been in a position like that where opening government puts you in a really morally reprehensible position? You know, maybe it's not that drastic. Maybe it's like, you know, we really don't see the problem with pushing little old ladies in wheelchairs out in front of cars. You know? Anybody been there where you've been put in a morally reprehensible position?
I haven't been there, but I was adjudicating one round, and it was, I think, a group from Nigeria, yeah, and they ran this line on why gay people are actually possessed by demons, and that they should be, yeah, it was like that. And I didn't know what closing, because it was an opening option. I didn't know what closing option would run. I can't remember this.
Okay, so
that's a good example.
Clearly people who are gay are possessed by demons. And so as a second government, your position is to do what?
This is maybe not the best strategy to win the debate. Maybe it is. I don't know. But my opinion is that you just knife them. And you don't butter knife them. You just knife them. And you take a moral stance and you say, sorry, we're knifing you, but we think that that was an immoral stance. And, like, I don't know.
That's what I would not look at that.
Okay, we're trying to have a good discussion. Let's let everybody get their point in.
You could say they're really friendly demons.
I think they're demons.
Fabulous demons.
Everybody's possessed by demons. This is working.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I'm old.
Walk. And the team that came before us, they said that they shouldn't because women provoke men to rape them, basically. Oh. And like along those lines, that men are just like they can control themselves and kind of lines like that. So I mean, what we did is just, I mean, everybody in the debate just assumed that that's not the case. Kind of, I mean, obviously opposition just went against what this team said, and we just kind of ran away from this, and we just gave other arguments as to why it's really important for the feminists not to do this, i.e. for like different kinds of principles, and this was like fine by the judge. But it's just because the other teams in the debate, like I mean, just rebutted this, but nobody kind of had a problem with us taking the other stance.
Well, any other thoughts?
I mean, I think, especially with like the examples we've given, as she said, it's never like the heart of the debate. Like oftentimes it might be a principle, like one of their main substantive arguments are that demons are in gay people, right? Like, and that's okay. You can just like never mention that again on your side. Like you don't have to address it at all. I
think going along with what you said about never mentioning it at all, I think it's right to bank on the judge being a reasonable human being and knowing that clearly this debate has taken a turn for the worse, and just, they will trust you to regroup and pretend that never happened for the better of the debate.
Can I suggest to you one thing that would be, I heard somebody say one strategy is to do a clear and make it clear that you are knifing them, right? Like this is a mercy killing.
We're taking it behind the
shadows. This might be an opportunity to talk a little bit when we're talking about what happens when opening gov goes horribly wrong. Is sometimes it's really important to pay attention to the adjudicators and their nonverbals. I mean, if the adjudicators look up in shock and horror, you know what? Maybe the best thing to do in that circumstance is to do a clear sever. Now, I don't know that I would announce to the adjudicators, okay, we're going to take him out, we're going to have a public execution. I don't know that I would do that. But I do think that your best strategy sometimes is to come back, not even mention opening government, come back and say, Mr. Speaker, as we understand the resolution today, and just go on. I don't know, what do you think, Julija?
Absolutely. The thing is that in that situation, you're probably not even trying to save them. But another crucial point of expressing how clearly you're trying to dissociate yourselves from them is also the whip speech, where normally you would be going through the entire side, but if something like that happens, your whip speech will be nothing but the summation of your team and not even mentioning the opening part. By doing that, you are implicitly knifing them, never having to say that, but that means that you do not accept anything that was said by them. So it doesn't have to be very humiliating, but it will be clear what has happened and nobody will be able to call you out on it. Now, it depends on the way that the moral reprehensible position was framed, but if you can't avoid at least bringing it up, if the opposition were insisting on it and you are expected to react to their refutation of that, then you can again accuse the opposition of focusing on some true, perhaps a little extreme examples by the opening. But now let's shift the debate towards principles or something. And also, I think you had a point about trying to find some principles somewhere in the back of this unwittingly, horribly phrased idea.
And a lot of this, too, has to do with how as Julija alluded to, how does First Op react to opening government, right? How do they take what opening government says? And you can get a little bit of a cue on how you can respond or how you can react based on that. It may be, again, if you have a good First Op, that they're trying to throw opening government a bone, trying to refocus the debate, trying to bring it back into what the resolution was really about, and you can really kind of, in a sense, use a good, if they're a good First Op, use them as your springboard to come back to the reality and to the debate itself.
That's what I was about to say. Just you're in a situation where you're opening up, just throw opening government a bone, like try to build a better case for them, and just try to bring things back together and for the better debate. And like you said, judging from the judge's nonverbals, they'll thank you later for the fact that you gave a good effort to get things back together.
Yeah, rather than gloat over the fact that they screwed up. So, you know, if a tragedy happens in a debate, acknowledge it as a tragedy rather than triumph over it. Okay, let's consider some other possible situations. What should you do as a closing team if the opening team members are internally inconsistent? So if there is a contradiction between the two of them, if they have knifed each other, so basically whatever position you take as the closing, you'll be knifing one of them, at least. Luke?
You pick one that's better for you.
Yeah, you pick one better for the day.
Okay. Any alternatives?
And it depends on how rescuable it is, right? I mean, I still, enjoy the try to make it seem like the opposition team has mischaracterized it and be like, what he really meant was blah, 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 which is totally in line with the other person. And so, you try to save them, you try to save your bin from looking like it's not being knifed at all. And I think that the judge will give you credit for that.
Yeah, so again, you can do them a favor by creating the link between the two opposing positions for them, so raising above that and trying to find some common denominator and then presenting their case through the lens of how in fact those two positions are not mutually exclusive, and then perhaps extend on that.
And sometimes it's easiest to talk about and try to find someone to divide it up, well, obviously the Prime Minister was talking about in the short term, whereas the Deputy Prime Minister was talking about the long term, but there will be this, and that's why they feel there's tension, but we believe that there's absolutely no tension, just keep on chugging.
Excellent. And it won't be the opening team to be credited for that, don't worry. It is always whoever saves it that gets credited. Comments, questions, ideas? Moving on. Alf, would you like to?
Trying to see which.
Okay, there is something that we kind of get to hear a lot, or occasionally it seems to be a concern. What happens if you're the closing team and the opening has stolen all your stuff? They've left you extensionless. What then?
Try to get a point that was kind of undeveloped by them and try to kind of reframe it in such a way that it sounds like a new thing.
Okay, how do you do that?
I suppose you can maybe, I've heard it being called a zoom in or zoom out approach. If they focus on a certain group like children and very much on the children and that in a society, then you zoom out to talk about the parents or the guardian perspective, perhaps, or maybe different perspectives and access.
Yeah, Jacob's and Arturo.
I think on that, it's unlikely that your opening team has looked at all the things they talked about on the micro and macro level. So if they're talking about macro harms to a group of people, then you can come out and look at largely the same harms, but on the micro level and how this affects individual lives, or vice versa, depending on context.
Yeah, for example, if they are very similar, which is rarely the case, they stole literally all your things. You could rescue some small pieces and actually flagging them in your speech. This is something that is very important to us, and we bring in the lower town, so as to make sure that it's out there as much as possible to try to say hey, this is our stuff, even though most of the argument is from the upper half.
Yeah, and a really good way to a really good way to demonstrate that your analysis is more substantial than everything that was brought to you from the team before you is if you can have much better examples and much more deeply analyzed examples and demonstrate why the examples that you employ actually show why the principle is more true and like more, or like the mechanism to the impact is like more believable or something like that. So I think examples are a really good way to say it's public art.
And also, I mean, not only examples, but getting your argument bigger by chunking it upwards, downwards, with examples, and showing that you have the most clear idea, and that is the argument that's going to explain really well.
I'm just going to say this up front. When I hear an opening government tell me that they are going to have 4 substantive points of material, the first thing I know is that they're either going to only have one that has appropriate support and impacts, or they're going to have 4 they're not going to have 4 arguments, they're going to have 4 claims. Does everybody understand the difference that I'm articulating here, the difference between a claim and an argument? And so I don't believe that it's possible, if you've done your prep work, I do not believe it's possible for a team to steal all your material. Because you can really, in opening government, even in the 14 minutes the government side has, you can only really effectively, considering that you have to do rebuttal if you're the second speaker, you can really only effectively deal with 2, maybe 3 correctly, where you have the right support and you have actual impacts to them. And so I'm going to suggest to you if they steal all your material, yeah, you may feel like that, but you need to work harder in the future on developing and listening. Because I'll tell you where another point comes in my view, and that's the opposition POIs. The opposition POIs are going to feed you material. If opposition's asking about it, that's something that's not being addressed well. It's something that hasn't been covered. So that's something that you can use to help if they've stolen all your material. I may sound harsh, but that's just what I feel.
I think maybe also what you could do is just do like a amazing rebuttal against the other side and then take the 2 and make your bench just the strongest bench by far. If they've really taken every single possible point, analyzed incredibly well, then you just kind of help make your bench stronger by completely destroying the other side and maybe take the 2, but riding along on their analysis, but also like proving you're stronger than the other side by just doing lots of rebuttal and examples.
Yeah. Here's the thing, it's actually a trick question because this is something that debaters and teams feel like it can happen in a debate, but as Art has just told you and proven it, it really doesn't. It cannot happen because 14 minutes are nowhere near enough to be able to cover all the possible aspects of a certain issue, proposal, motion. And so basically it comes down to how well you prepared during your 15 minutes. What John Mark suggested was this zooming in and zooming out. Basically, if you do your stakeholder analysis in your 15 minutes, and it takes like 1.5 minutes to have it all covered, if the opening team wants to be anywhere near effective and efficient, they will either be able to cover just one of them well, or kind of pick about and just touch upon things, but not really go into depth. So it is about preparing all these various areas in your notes and in your preparation, and then just ticking off what it is that they have covered well, and marking down what it is they haven't covered and that you can use to strengthen your position.
Well, the stuff they haven't covered well, you can make that a better extension of your own.
Right.
Precisely.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah, so there will either be some stuff that they never touched upon, but it's always better if it's something they mention in passing, but never realize the full extent to which that can be used as the winning argument in the debate. For example, the impact of something that they mention as just an afterthought, or the effect of that on a different stakeholder, or a different time frame, long-term versus short-term, etc. But they will never be able to steal all your stuff. If that is the case, that means that you had some very obvious and very shallow stuff to begin with.
time are we till?
Okay, it's 10 now. 10:15 is when the exercises begin. We can go briefly through just a couple more points. Yes.
I want to talk about this from opposition. Sometimes there's a notion in which there are kind of two opposition lines you can take, and both tend to be relatively narrow. If your opening team picks one of them, to what extent is taking the other one knifing, or do you still have to go with the same opposition line, so to speak?
That's an excellent question. And that is something that tends to change a lot, just within debating theory. It's not set in stone, it's quite dynamic, it still changes. Because for a while the rules were pretty strict, no knifing on either side. But it all depends on how you define, on what you really define British parliamentary to be. If the analogy that we sometimes use, namely having a coalition government as the opposition, really holds, then of course you can have the opposition attacking the government's plan for different reasons. And that is true. So there is a little bit more leeway with the opposition side in not necessarily having to follow a strong team line. Now, straight knifing when it comes to facts, for example, or using the same example to demonstrate two diametrically opposed points is still not legitimate. But analyzing different kinds of risk, for example, is perfectly legitimate, and you have a little bit more room there than the government would have. Does that answer the question?
I think so.
Yeah, of course it's case-to-case basis, but you're not obliged to follow the same line of attack as the opening team. Art, do you agree?
Yes, within the context of this, I think you have to pay attention to the framework as well. And I think that the adjudicators are going to give you more points if your attack is still within the existing framework. If you go completely outside of the existing framework, I think that's when you can hurt yourself.
So basically you can take out your different thread as long as you are not completely opposite the opening team.
As long as it's still relevant to the debate, basically.
For example, we have the case of consumerism, and our first thought, I think, came with this stance of no state intervention ever, no incentivizing absolutely anything. And kind of our whole case was built around Keynesian economics and incentivizing and by incentivizing something is okay on a macroeconomic level. Would something like this be okay? Would it be a viable alternative, or would it be considered a matter as an option?
Okay, that's tough. Since it wasn't in the debate, it's difficult to get an idea. So you were opening up and...
So they were opening up and they came with states should never interfere in the economy and blah blah. And we came with why intervening in economics with raising the assumption would be okay with macroeconomic level.
Okay, that is one of those cases where it can really depend on how you frame it linguistically. Because if you just present it like that, they said no state intervention ever. So far that's been the debate, state intervention versus no state intervention. And then if you basically ruin the clash in the debate, that's not a good thing. But what you can do, and what is one of those methods for butter knifing, namely separating and distancing yourself from the opening team without making it look too brutal, is by presenting what you're by presenting your case as an even if. So, the opposition has done a good job in the first part, but even if for any reason we were to accept the reasoning by the other team, even then it wouldn't stand because, and then your case. So presenting it as an alternative scenario, as just an example of why it still doesn't stand or why it still stands if you're the government.
You should interfere with economics, like you shouldn't intervene by lowering consumption, on the contrary to this, right? Kind of.
Possibly, since say I wasn't in the debate, but this even ifing is something that can be potentially very useful and very powerful as long as you do it elegantly enough, otherwise it can be a knife.
So like you help your whole bench because you see like even if we were to accept this, still opposition / government is right because
Precisely, it is closing this gap that is left in the first half.
2 minutes. No, I'm talking about
The point.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have some other ideas of things that can go wrong. These are some individual ones, such as, for example, what do you do when the speaker who was right before you didn't have much to say, or they had a panic attack, they spoke for 2 minutes, 2.5, and sat down, didn't say anything?
On your team? Or?
No. But we can do that, or on your team. So what do you do when you weren't provided with any material by the...
You reverse straw man.
Reverse straw man, please explain.
So you take words that they mentioned, like they said the word economics, which is what they really meant by that was that economic intervention can be dangerous for 3 reasons, and we'll tell you why that's not true. Right?
Try to make it the same as that, kind of make the points for them and then make them at their strongest, not at their weakest.
Right.
Precisely. It's always about beating them at their strongest, and if they don't have any, then you create something.
So I think they were planning to say, but they didn't.
And how do you know what their strongest points are, even if they didn't introduce any?
The ones that you can beat.
Prep time. What would you have done in their position? Most probably, outline it in 1 minute, the possible lines that they will take, and then if the word economics appears, they must have made that point, and they go on that. Okay, how about this? There was a case yesterday in one round where your partner speaking before you, so you're going as the second speaker of your team, and your partner fails to mention a key point.
Where?
Yeah, there are 2 possible ways. One would be if you're opening government, so there is a part of the proposal actually missing. Or even worse, if you're closing up and basically you're not supposed to introduce anything new, but it's crucial. What do you do?
Well, you try your best to POI, right?
Luke?
And you kind of try to make it seem like your partner got there, and especially not quick. You blow that idea up. My partner mentioned this. Here's how this functions, and everything that goes along with it.
But I introduce a true example, and then ask them to explain the example. You sort of explaining something else, which might not have been the best.
And here, I think linguistics play a key role, because you want to use kind of the same words he did to make a different point, and oftentimes they'll be like, oh yeah, he said those words, yeah. So.
But to the effect of something else, right? That was just an example, it wasn't the mechanism when you're not supposed to have one. What about when it happens in the first part, in the first half? And then finish.
I think you could do the same thing. You could say okay, this is what my partner said, and this is how it connects to this, and just reinforce it strongly to the point where it's as if that your partner had mentioned it. Basically, the end goal is that make it so that way the core value stays in the judge's head for the rest of the debate, kind of like a damage control for your partner, but not knifing them or making them look bad.
Yeah, please don't. Basically, you're hoping that the judge will take your words when you try to convince them that they simply misheard it or failed to hear it, when in fact it was said loud and clear, but they were busy with something else. So kind of, you hope that it will fly. Okay, if there are no more questions, comments, yeah.
Back here in the corner, you brought up about the governments, the opening opposition said no under no circumstances. And then what was it you brought up? I didn't catch all of that.
We try to have a stance saying by raising consumption, by changing economics, monetary policy, fiscal policy, and whatnot, would be really beneficial for the economy, and that's why we like consumer mentality.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, could you have couched that in such a way that you said, we completely agree with the fact that it should never, never, never be done, and here's our point on how it's really bad that supports why it should never be done.
Did you repeat the question?
Okay, apparently we're not talking so.
No.
I'm missing what you're saying, so that's okay.
Well, people are really simply their argument was like, free market economics, the state should never intervene in the economy, the economy is better off on itself. And we had a whole argument about how loading into the state or printing more money for the government to raise consumption would be really beneficial. That was kind of the case.
How does this link to consumerism?
Well, let me just get to the point I was trying to make, and that is sometimes when somebody says something, we will never ever do this up here, and it's very, very, strong clash. Sometimes you can turn your point, if it's a little bit different, to say, we completely agree up here, and this is an example of why we agree with them, if it's something that still supports the point. So that's all I was trying to get to.
Either that or playing the real world game. Like, we agree that on a principle level, state intervention in any way, shape or form is bad. However, since we do live in a world where we cannot anticipate that to happen in the next X years, here is why up until then this would work that way. So then you are kind of even-ifing it by creating two alternative scenarios, but not necessarily making them mutually exclusive. So as long as they're not mutually exclusive, you're not openly contradicting, you're not knifing anyone. Okay, if that's it, 5 minutes of coffee break, toilet break, and then exercise groups. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.